Okay, hearing section, we're going to get going. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to tee this meeting off. Folks in the back of the room, please take your comments outside. Hearing section. Okay, good morning. Welcome to Mystic, everybody. We've got a fairly full agenda. I do want to add two issues to other business. One is a notice of closure issue that we went around about over this weekend. And the second is an issue concerning ACCSP funding for shoreside monitoring of bycatch. Are there any other items folks would like to add to the agenda? Seeing none, then consider the agenda approved. The proceedings from August 2014, are there any comments, additions, or deletions, edits? Seeing none, consider the proceedings approved. Under public comment, we have one woman in the audience, Mary Beth Tooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a brief comment, and that would be relative to the Herring AP. I've been a member of the advisory panel for many years, and we met recently by conference call, which is a really good way to quickly bring a group together to provide some input to the Commission in their process. But I do think that when we're undergoing an amendment process, that it would be a really good idea if we could have an in-person meeting, at least one somewhere as things develop. And we haven't had one in some time. I know that participation in the AP has not been the best in recent years, and I do think that if we were to have an in-person meeting where people could actually sit down and discuss the issues, it would provide a lot of value to your process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth. You want to follow up, Melissa?
Thank you, Mary Beth. When I give the update on the development of Draft Amendment 3, the PDT has requested an extension for additional time to work on it, and also to provide time to have an in-person advisory panel meeting. So we will plan on having one. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak to the section? Seeing none, we're going to turn it over to Melissa for an update on the development of the draft amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So right now I will provide an update on the progress and development of Draft Amendment 3 to the Atlantic Herring FMP. So as a reminder, the three issues presented into Amendment 3 are spawning area efficacy, the fixed gear set-aside, and empty fish hole provision. So this is the timeline for the development of Draft Amendment 3. Originally, we intended to have the section consider approval of Draft Amendment 3 for public comment at this meeting. However, the PDT requests additional time to complete analysis of the spawning area efficacy, as requested through the memo that's provided in the briefing materials, and also the advisory panel would like to have an in-person meeting to give a more thorough review of socioeconomic impacts and guide us in the development of management options. So now we'll go over the contents of Draft Amendment 3. Under Chapter 1, which consists of background information on the resource and fishery, we discussed the statement of the problem or why this amendment is needed and the benefits of implementation. So the intention of Amendment 3 is to enhance spawning protections, create an incentive for better fishing practices to reduce unmarketable catch, and to minimize adverse effects on species that are associated with Atlantic herring, such as river herring, while minimizing the adverse effects on participants in the fishery. Description of the resource characterizes the range, stock, definition and status, and life history information. This is one of the sections that the PDT will continue to develop and include additional analysis to update the information, particularly the spawning stages of Atlantic herring. And then description of the fishery characterizes the historical and recent trends of the fishery. So just a brief review, over the time series from 1950 to 2013, the annual commercial catch by the United States Atlantic herring fleet was generally flat with slightly declining trend between 1950 through 1983 when it reached a historic low of 51 million pounds. So since then, catch has increased and peaked in 2009 with 225 million pounds and averaged about 154 million pounds. So in 2013, the catch totaled 235 million pounds, which is an increase from 2012. A majority of the herring is caught by trawls, followed by the purse seine. So when the section reviewed the public information document, it requested some information on the monthly landings. So this graph shows the distribution of herring landings by month. To illustrate recent trends, the orange shaded area is the 10-year average, while the blue is the 3-year average from 2011 to 2013. So as you can see, the recent trend in higher amount caught from June through late October reflects the recent management program of seasonal splitting. And then continuing with the contents, Section 1.4, Habitat Considerations, contains the Essential Fish Habitat designation, which was provided by the New England Fishery Management Council. So currently, the Council has proposed an update to the Atlantic herring EFH through its Omnibus Habitat Amendment 2. Impacts of the fishery management program includes analyses of the potential biological and environmental impacts to the proposed measures. I will go over that in more detail later. And Section 1.5 contains the analysis on social economic impacts of each issue. The second chapter is on goals and objectives of this amendment. So the PDT is seeking clarification from the section on the management goal of the FMPs, specifically in regard to the spawning protection program. So basically, the PDT wishes to know if the goal of the spawning protection program is to prevent disruption of spawning activities or to prevent catch of spawning fish, which would have some tolerance of like fish being caught and brought to port. So a statement of the management goal will help guide the PDT's development of spawning protection management options. So this chapter also includes the overfishing definition, which is taken from the 2012 stock assessment for Atlantic herring, completed through the 54th stock assessment workshop, which found the stock to be not experiencing overfishing and is not overfished. An operational stock assessment for Atlantic herring is scheduled for 2015. So currently there's no rebuilding program for Atlantic herring because it is rebuilt. In Chapter 3, the monitoring program lays out the responsibilities of the technical committee, advisory panel, plan review team, and the section to ensure that each of the listed items are reviewed consistently. Next one. The chapter on management program implementation presents the issues and options for management measures in each of these categories, and I will go over these issues after the summary of the contents. And then to wrap it up, Chapter 5 contains the mandatory compliance elements for states to be consistent with the FMP. Chapter 6 lists the research and data needs to inform stock assessment and management programs. And this is another section that the PDT wouldn't have to update for this amendment. Chapter 7 contains an analysis of the interaction between Atlantic herring and protected species such as marine mammals and sea turtles. And finally, Chapter 8 lists the references used throughout the document. So issue 1, spawning area efficacy. So there is a need to review spawning area of inshore spawning areas because there are maybe variations in the spawning season that is different from the patterns when the spawning closure program was first implemented. So for example, if herring are still spawning after the 4-week closure and fishing resumes, the PDT believes that there's potential for a large amount of spawning herring to be caught. And the current mechanism to extend the closure, which is a reclosure of the program, the spawning closure for 2 weeks, is different from the original triggered because it is based on 25% of the herring still in spawning stages rather than the state of spawning maturity of the fish. So the plan development team reviewed boundary and sampling programs for the Massachusetts, New Hampshire spawning area specifically. It found the boundaries to be adequate at this time. It does not recommend any sub-areas or splits. Currently, there's just not enough information to inform that. And also, a biological rationale for the 2-week extension is there might be a potential gear bias during sampling. So the plan development team reviewed the socioeconomic impacts of this issue by working with the advisory panel. So the conclusion was that a 2-week extension to the Massachusetts, New Hampshire area would have a negative impact on industry. The cost of business outweighs the need for additional protection of a rebuilt stock. So according to the 2012 stock assessment, the spawning stock biomass of Atlantic herring is, in 2011, was 517,000 metric tons, which is 230% above the SSB MSY. So the stock is not overfished, and there is no biological justification for additional precautionary measures. So the two management options we have at this point, option 1, status quo. So by default, the spawning area closure will last for 4 weeks. Catch sampling of the fishery will resume at the end of the initial 4-week closure period. If catch sampling indicates significant numbers of spawning herring are still in the area, closures will resume for an additional 2 weeks. And a significant number of spawning herring is defined as 25% or more mature herring by number in the catch sample have yet to spawn. Mature or spawn herring are defined as Atlantic herring in the ICNAF gonada stages of 5 and 6. So option 2 is the 2-week extension to the Massachusetts, New Hampshire spawning area. So this area closure will last for 6 weeks, and then the additional 2 weeks will serve as a default in lieu of the continued sampling and reclosure. So statement of the problem for issue 2, the fixed gear set aside. So there's anecdotal evidence of sea herring in the Gulf of Maine after November 1, and fixed gear fishermen have expressed that they want to have the set aside available to them through the remainder of the year. So the plan development team noted at this time that there is no biological basis for or against adjusting the fixed gear set aside. The fixed gear landings have not been fully utilized in the last 10 years. In fact, there have been 0 landings caught from the fixed gear fleet after November 1. And also they wanted to note that the fixed gear fishery can still access the total Area 1A subquota, given that the total allowable catch has not been reached. And lastly, the plan development team notes that the state and federal rules would be inconsistent with the current if the current provision is adjusted. So the socioeconomic impact analysis, there will be a neutral impact to industry either way if this provision is adjusted. The advisory panel did note, and the plan development team also noted that the cost needed to implement complementary action outweighs the need to adjust the set aside. So the set aside is a relatively small portion of the total allowable catch. So for instance, in 2013 through 2015, it's 295 metric tons of the 31,200 metric tons for Area 1A. And again, landings from the past 10 years shows no landings from November through December. And then the management options we have so far are option 1, status quo. The fixed gear set aside will be available to the fixed gear fishermen until November 1. And then after that point, if the set aside has not been fully utilized by the fixed gear fisheries west of Cutler by November 1, it will be made available to the remainder of the herring fleet in Area 1A until the directed fishery closes. And of course, we want to add this piece to make it more clear that fixed gear fishermen can continue fishing and landings will count towards the Area 1A subquota. And then issue 2, option 2, is to remove the fixed gear set-aside rollover provision. Then the fixed gear set-aside will be available to fixed gear fishermen west of Cutler through December 31st. When 92% of the Area 1A TAC has been reached, all directed herring fisheries in Area 1A will be closed, and unused portions of the fixed gear set-aside will not be rolled over from one year to the next. So the third issue, empty fish hold provision, is a requirement for vessel owners to empty the fish hold prior to departing on a trip. And so this issue was raised because of instances of large catch that would result in unsold fish, which is a challenge to dispose of. And then there's also the issue of mixing and double counting catch landed from multiple trips, which impacts the monitoring of bycatch and incidental catch of river herring and such species. So as a reminder, the New England Fishery Management Council approved the requirement in its draft framework adjustment 4 for vessel holds to be empty of fish prior to leaving a dock. So the council adopted alternative 2.1.2, alternative 2, option C. A waiver will be issued for instances when there are fish in the holds after inspection by an appropriate law enforcement officer. This alternative will only apply to categories A and B boats, and the intent is for waivers to be issued for refrigeration failure and non-marketable reported fish. So the plan development team recognized that fishermen may have surplus catch that cannot be sold and is a challenge to dispose. The proposed requirement to empty fish the holds of fish may be an incentive to curb wasteful fishing practices and harvest more efficiently to meet market demands. This could eliminate the practice of keeping fish in a hold from one trip to another, which mixes the amount of fish that's caught. This does need consideration for law enforcement, and the plan development team will be working with the law enforcement committee to better develop a system for this. And at this time, the plan development team also worked with the advisory panel to discuss the issue of waivers, whether there should be a limit to the number of waivers. And at this time, there's not information to inform an appropriate number. So for the socioeconomic impact analysis, it was concluded that this would have a positive impact on industry, that it would create an incentive for fishermen to better plan their fishing activities to meet market demand. And as there is not enough information at this time to enforce the limit of waivers, a waiver system can actually serve as a way to collect data on the frequency and the reasons that for unmarketable fish. And it will also create safer conditions for people working on vessels. So the management options are option 1, status quo. Currently there's no empty fish hold provision, and there will be no requirement for vessels to empty their holds of fish prior to a fishing departure. Option 2, empty fish hold provision. So this mirrors the option that was provided by the New England Fishery Management Council in its framework 4. This option will require that fish holds on categories A, B, and Atlantic herring vessels are empty of fish before leaving the dock on any trip when declared into the Atlantic herring fishery. A waiver may be issued for instances when there are fish in the hold after inspection by an appropriate law enforcement officer. And the intent is for waivers to be issued for refrigeration failure and non-marketable fish that has been reported by the vessel. So only vessels departing on a fishing trip, which is declared into the fishery, are required to have empty holds of fish, holds empty of fish. As such, waivers would not be required for vessels transporting fish from dock to dock. A government official must verify the amount of fish in the hold, reasons for unmarketable fish, and the vessels transporting fish to multiple ports. And so in conclusion, the plan development team still requests additional time for a complete analysis, particularly of the spotting efficacy section. And also the advisory panel will be planning an in-person meeting to go over the amendment in more detail. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Questions for Melissa? David?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Be a really quick question. On the fish hole inspection by the enforcement personnel, what is the expectation that the enforcement personnel are going to do? Are they going to certify that there are fish in the hole, or are they going to be certifying how much fish is in the hole?
So basically, the idea was to have someone certify, a government official certify the fish hold so that there would be a record of what the reasons for unmarketable fish, and it would be a better way to keep track of how many fish is actually kept in a hold if a boat has to move from one port to another, multiple ports.
David?
Just a quick follow-up. Have the enforcement committee reviewed the provision on this? I'm just kind of curious.
No, that's one of the things we would like to have the additional time to do, to work more closely with the law enforcement committee. We had a brief conversation during the development of the public information document, but we needed time after meeting with the advisory panel to circle back with the law enforcement committee.
Further questions for Melissa? Okay, seeing none, Melissa, your PDT's intent is to have this document ready for us to approve at the winter meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. We're moving on to our 2015 specs. Sorry, Doug.
The PDT had a question for the board, I believe.
Yes, we would like further clarification on the management goals for the spawning protection program.
And the way I read it is under one of our objectives is to provide adequate protection for spawning herring and to prevent damage to the herring egg beds. And currently the way we're handling things is to, from the way I perceive it, prevent the catch of spawning herring. And that seems to have been a fairly good way of determining, trying to prevent fishing on spawning herring, while trying to prevent the disruption of spawning activity. I don't know how we prove that. So that would be my response to the question, that we should, for clarification, that we're trying to prevent the catch of spawning herring.
Other comments, David?
No, I agree with Doug. It's to protect spawning herring, taking fishing pressure off of spawning herring. Unlike codfish, where they come and they meander and they form leks, and there's a day and a nighttime spawning ritual, and it occurs over a long period of time. Sea herring schools arrive on the grounds and they spawn. It's a rather quick event. That's been documented. That's well documented. So I don't believe there's any need for us to try to get into the fine-tuning of actually trying to deal with taking fishing pressure off of the spawning behavior, because it just happens. Fortunately, it's a quick thing. So I agree with Doug, and that's the way we've been doing it. That's been the procedure that we follow, the logic that we follow for many years, and I see no reason to depart from the way we've been protecting spawning herring through the measures we have in place now.
So to expand upon that thought, take an area like the eastern Maine area where there was no spawned herring being sampled. We've gone around. One of the reasons why I think we're discussing the development of this amendment is to address when and why and how we close areas. And so what I'm taking from you, David and Doug, is that we're solely protecting spawning fish and not fish, whether they're adults or juveniles or whatever life stage they're at. Doug?
Yeah, as long as you're sampling the boats and the samples that you're getting do not have spawn herring, either because they're juveniles or because they're not herring that are not in spawning condition, I think that's what we're trying to get at, is if we do come across spawning herring in the catch based on the criteria set by the plan, that's when you would close the fishery.
David?
Well, in light of what you just said, Terry, I've got to elaborate a bit. My focus is on spawning fish, but I've always said, and I continue to say, that, and I know there's disagreement with me on this, that, all right, the vessels are not fishing on spawning fish, so what do they then direct on? Well, spent fish, we would hope. Adult fish, we would hope that are spent, but oftentimes they'll focus on juvenile fish, and sometimes very small fish, and I don't think that's wise. But that's not an element of our management program, protecting juvenile fish. It's about let them spawn, take the pressure off of spawning fish. So I just wanted to make that point because of what you said, Mr. Chairman. My concern continues to be there, but I'm not prepared to offer up any motion that would initiate some action that would somehow stop the fishery from focusing on juvenile fish. That's a very complicated matter, to say the least. I mean, we tried to do that in the past, and we've been rather unsuccessful. So for now, it's all about spawning fish. And the resource is in great shape, which also puts us in somewhat of a comfort zone. We'd be in a lot different position regarding what we might want to do or should do if we were looking at a biomass of herring that was on the low side, similar to the way it was back in the 1970s when we had some real problems. So anyways, that's my view on that.
No, thank you for the clarification, because I reflect upon the passionate speeches by our old friend Vito J. And wanted just to make sure that the PDT's guidance was clear. Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should have put my hand up before to ask about if Melissa's going to provide some comments from the AP call. We did have an AP call, and I give Melissa a lot of credit for tracking everybody down a couple times so we could get that done. I think we did touch on the spawning issues a little bit, but I just wanted to, if I could, Mr. Chairman, get some clarification from what Doug was suggesting, so I can understand it and interpret it to other people. Were you talking about changing the language in the objective on page 26, which continues with language that says protect damage to herring egg beds? And on page 41, there's language in the document that states that trawling in spawning areas or primary nursing areas should be prohibited. And I think the issue of bottom trawling in closed areas to protect spawning herring has come up for years, and it did come up again on the call. So I'm just pointing out that the goals and objectives in the document are contrary to the way the spawning closures are now managed, and that is that just herring boats can't go in there. So I would just raise that issue because the goals and objectives around that issue may be contrary to the way that the spawning closures have always worked. And so anyway, I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Anybody else? So Melissa and Renee, are you have what you need?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're now going to move on to the specs.
So under Addendum 6 to the Atlantic Herring FMP, the section can set seasonal splitting for areas 1A, 1B, and 2. So last year, as with the previous year, 0% of the total area sub-quota for Area 1A was allocated to January 1 through May 31st. 72% was available from June through September, and 27.2% was allocated from October to December. And the fishery will close when 92% of the seasonal period's quota has been harvested. So that was last year's motion.
Section discussion. Doug.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, and I believe I gave this to Loren. I'm going to move to allocate the 2015 Area 1A TAC seasonally with 72.8% available from June through September and 27.2% allocated from October through December. The fishery will close when 92% of the seasonal period's quota has been harvested, and underages from June through September may be rolled over into October through December period.
Okay, you want to check your motion, Doug? It just went up on the board. Oops.
After June through September, it should say may be rolled into the October through December period.
Okay, is it second by Bill Adler? Bill?
Yes, second, but also the, okay, she corrected the maybe to maybe.
Section discussion? Mary Beth, do you want to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first had a question. I'm just wondering if we have any information available on how well this process has functioned in recent years relative to attaining the 92%. I don't believe we've had any seasonal closures that have been needed. I'm not sure if that's correct. I think we actually did go over in perhaps 2012, and then this year, perhaps it was close, maybe slightly over. I don't know, Melissa, do you have any information on whether or not any seasonal quotas have been exceeded, particularly the June through the end of September?
For this past fishing year, there was an underage, so actually we were pretty spot on. So there wasn't any, there was only a very small amount that was rolled into the third trimester.
Yeah, and I think and I could be incorrect because I haven't looked at these numbers recently, but 2013, I think there was, the trimester from June through the end of September was exceeded. Not by much, I don't think, but I think it was exceeded.
Yes, it was exceeded by a small amount, so then it was deducted from the third trimester's sub-quota.
So I think in general, the program does work. I'm not saying that it does not, but that amount of fish that's allocated for the fall, if the earlier season is exceeded, then that's a loss of fish to those fishermen who rely on that fall fishery, and it's created a lot of angst and clearly they're unhappy. In the federal plan, we have the ability to roll fish over from year to year. We also have deductions if you exceed a quota. And in this particular plan, there is no deduction. So I think, it's not part of this, but I think, it is something for the section to consider, that in the future, if you have a quota that's exceeded, then it should be deducted from that seasonal quota in the following year. I'm not sure that you have the ability to do that today, but I would ask the section to consider it perhaps in a future action to make that adjustment. I think it's an issue of fairness, and fishermen would appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not this year, but didn't last year they reached their basically 72, whatever it was, and we had actually closed it for like a week and then reopened it? Didn't that happen?
Yes, I believe that did happen.
Other comments from the section? Seeing none, why don't you caucus and we'll... Okay, everyone ready? Those support the motion on the board, please indicate so. Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Is there any further business under this agenda item, Melissa?
No, we're good, thank you.
Okay, we're on to an update on the offshore spawning study. Tony, are you going to do that? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been discussing through the NRCC the potential to do an offshore spawning site in the Nantucket Shoals area. And we've had several discussions at NRCC as well as with the Science Center to see where we can do some data collection or collaboration of data collection. Since we've discussed with this section the expense of this spawning study, if the section wants to manage the offshore spawning site in a similar way that we manage the inshore spawning events. And through the discussion with the Science Center, there are no current surveys or sampling programs that would overlap with that area at the correct time. And so we would have to come up with new funding to do a sampling program in order to manage in the same way. And currently there is no additional funding through the Science Center to do such a survey. We did discuss with them, though, to get some information from the previous acoustic survey so that we can get a better understanding of the timing of the spawning, although we know that that is variable and isn't going to be something that we can always count on, but it'll at least give us a better idea, and we're going to do that data exchange with them. But until we come up with some additional funding, if we're going to manage in the same way, I don't see the ability to do a study. Terry, do you have anything else to add?
No, that was pretty complete. The Science Center did underscore that the distribution is thin, so they need a broad-based survey. They did request, if it's the section's intent to move forward with this, that we clarify whether or not we intend to manage Area 3 the same way we do Area 1A. And the high cost of even developing the survey was going to exceed our budget, much less implementation of it altogether. So they asked for us to identify a secure source of funding before we came back to them. Sarah.
Thank you for the update and for pursuing that, and even though we don't, at least I don't like the answer, at least getting an answer. How much, have we identified a dollar amount both for the development of what the survey would look like as well as the implementation, so we have some notion of how much?
So in the second TC report, they did provide an estimated budget. I believe off the top of my head, it was about $92,000 to $115,000 for a full-time employee who will help design the program and also analyze the samples.
On top of that, Sarah, the annual costs, our current state of Maine bycatch portside monitoring program, which we're going to talk about in the next agenda, one of the next agenda items, is around $200,000 a year. And one of the important components of it is fresh samples. And there was concerns expressed by the Science Center on how we would get fresh fish ashore, and who would be cutting it. Renee.
Additionally, the cost provided by the TC was just for the sampling similar to the program that happens in 1A right now. That did not include the cost of a survey that we would have to do to get the background information to do that.
Any other questions, comments on Area 3? Okay. Thank you, Tony. We're on to review and populate the AP membership. Melissa.
So we have a new nomination for a new advisory panel member. His name is Sean Joyce for the state of New Hampshire. So at this time, the section, please consider approving him for the advisory panel.
Doug. Richie.
I'd like to nominate Sean. He's a very active recreational fisherman and is close friends with a commercial fisherman and does go out on that person's small mesh bottom trawl fairly frequently. So he's fairly knowledgeable on the subject.
Steve.
You need a second on that?
Is there an objection to adding Sean? Seconded by Steve Train. Is there an objection to adding Sean as a member of the AP? Seeing none, would you please extend our congratulations and condolences?
We welcome him.
Okay, we're on to other business. I added 2 issues, one of which was notification of closure of directed fisheries. This past week, David and Doug and I had a fair amount of correspondence about initially the notice that came from Garfro on the 23rd, the ASMFC notice that came the following day on the 24th. And the problem that we had was the state of Maine requiring in our rules that the industry be notified in a newspaper. Because of this notification process, the state of Maine was not able to restrict landings at midnight on Saturday. There was one more landing day in Maine, and the industry is tied up ashore. We identified in our follow-up conversations a couple fixes to this. The first is the wordings on our ASMFC notices need to reference the restrictions that remain into effect until 90% of the TAC for the period June through September is projected to be exceeded. This currently did not. Probably more importantly than that is in the past, and there's been a change of regard at Garfo. We used to, state directors used to get a heads up that they were getting close to issuing their closure. State of Maine appreciated this because it takes us 3 to 4 days to get the notice out. Finally, we noticed, or it was clear to me in the agency's closure notice, that there's no language referring state landing stay restrictions, so that industry and enforcement were clear on what's allowed and what's not. We don't think in our sidebar conversations over the weekend that there's any formal action that this section needs to take, with the exception of if it's the section's will, I could draft a letter to the agency requesting that they follow through with their notification and modify their language for the quota closures. It's a one-time problem. I hope it's never replicated, but it caused a lot of angst between 3 states and the industry members, and so I'll be willing to take any questions or any suggestions. Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciating what you've said. But I would question in this modern day, and in a day where people aren't reading newspapers, that newspaper notification is greatly outmoded, and would Maine consider a different notification process to speed up the notifications? It's just a gone-by thing that people read newspapers to start with, and plus I assume you have to pay to put the notice in the newspaper.
It's archaic, but it's in our laws, and I hope, we've worked, Pat and I have worked with our current AP not only for herring closures but for shrimp closures. And I'll read you from our rules. It's a very specific language. It says, herring permitted license holders shall be informed by public notice in a newspaper circulated in the area affected of any effort reduction dates. Fine on most weeks, but on a Friday, when the papers don't, we can't get notices of anything into the papers, it doesn't become effective until the following week. So we can, there's no possible way. We'd love to go electronic. Matt Siri runs he has a email distribution list, but it's a courtesy, not a formality. I think if we were in the position of having had the information on Tuesday, we could have started the process and had it in effect. I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just telling you the predicament that we're in. Doug.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the fact that the National Marine Fisheries Service is not a member of this section, I know we spoke last night with Mike Petney, who's the assistant to the regional administrator, but it might be worth, I'd like to make a motion that we do draft a letter asking them to see if they can modify the language in their notice to somehow reflect the fact that there are no landing days according to the commission process, and that they need to take that into consideration, and then also ask them to resume the practice that they had of notifying states in advance of when they anticipate putting out a closure notice, so that we can have our notices come out at the same time that theirs does. Is there a second?
Is there a second? Seconded by Bill. That was seconded by Bill Adler. Joe, thank you. That would certainly help close the loop and ensure that, we don't have another situation like this again. Is there any further section discussion? David.
Well, regarding what happened, that's relative to the motion. I've had 3 days to calm down. Friday was a difficult day to say the least, because I had to deal with members of the Massachusetts fishing industry, the processors, and their anger that they could not land in Massachusetts after the federal closure, yet fish could be landed in the state of Maine. It led to some rather interesting discussions between me and the Massachusetts processors and fishermen, and I don't want to go through that again. It was awkward, it was embarrassing, and frankly, I had to conclude my discussions with the industry by saying Massachusetts is not going to modify its rules and regulations like that to accommodate the fact that there is an inequity here. You can land in Maine, but you can't land in Massachusetts. Terry and I, the chairman and I, had a long discussion on Friday. I understood the problem as best I could. I understood the problem faced by Terry in particular. Wasn't happy with the outcome, to say the least. I had a different point of view from the chairman, but at the same time, I'm not from the state of Maine, which has its own unique way of doing business, not in a bad way, but unique way, archaic way. No, sorry about that, Terry. I didn't mean to say that. Anyways, I'm satisfied that the chair has been taking every step necessary to avoid this happening again. The simple response that I had to mining industry on Friday was, go land in the state of Maine. Oh my goodness. So the processors in Massachusetts weren't too happy with that outcome, go land in the state of Maine, but that was the only option available to them. Now, whether or not the landings that have occurred because of this awkward situation will result in the exceeding of the 1A quota, that remains to be seen. That remains to be seen, I suppose, and I really hope it doesn't happen. We'll just wait and see. So, again, I had to get that off my chest, make it known that there was a lot of conversation back and forth. I also spoke with Jeff Kalin, who made a call to me asking what's going on. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for clarifying the situation and for offering up ways to move forward that will prevent this from happening again.
Thank you, David. I almost need to send my response via carrier passenger pigeon. So I've got Tom Flaherty, Jeff, and Sarah.
Terry, is there any movement to basically correct it? And also, doesn't NOAA, I know they know in our area, they announce fishery closures a couple of days in advance, and so that gives us plenty of time. But I mean, we need to really address where you can basically do this by email or electronics. I mean, is there any movement in the legislature to do that?
Going to break the rules here and call on Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Marine Resources continues to argue with our Attorney General's office on this point. We have tried to correct this several times. The issue for us is it's not within Title 12 where our rules and laws reside. So it's become a big issue. Mr. Pierce is absolutely correct because it is an archaic way to do business, and it's one that we're continuing to try to resolve. But I think the language that's being discussed now with that motion and with some tighter language coming out of the section when we get to the closures, as Doug and I discussed with Terry last night, I think will help resolve this in the future to avoid this problem again. But the legislative debate, Representative Kamiga can try to work it through, but it's been a very tough. We've tried to address this at least 4 times now.
Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Dave's comments about whether or not the industry might have gone over, the fleet might have gone over the other night, I mean, I think Friday afternoon, the notice came out that you could go till midnight Sunday, and when it was clear that landings couldn't occur in Massachusetts, which is where our boats were, and that Maine was open, and that there was quota that was available, 8 platforms did go to Maine on a 9-truck limit, so we self-limited based on what we believed to have been the quota. And the quota that was on the internet had already deducted the 932 tons for the RSA, which gets added back before the end of the period. So our estimate is that we were with that 900 tons, about 1,200 tons shy of the 1A quota, based on the self-limit that the industry, we put ourselves on a limit so we wouldn't go over. We were in touch with Pete Christopher that afternoon. I had set the afternoon aside to work on my fluke PID comments, frankly. I think all of us had other things on the agenda Friday when this blew up, but I just wanted to express on behalf of the industry that we did self-limit to try to stay under that quota. And also, the other thing I wanted to point out is we've only taken about 1/3 of the Area 2 quota so far. We didn't have a winter fishery in Area 2, so, resource-wide, we're still well under where we're supposed to be. So I just wanted the section members to know that we tried to self-limit because we were very concerned about an overage like we had in 1B before last year. So we're trying to be responsible around a very confusing afternoon. So thank you. I appreciate you calling me back too, Dave. I really do, because it was a tough day for all of us. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, just want to, it's been raised already, but weigh in on my concern about this motion and how we would address the overage issue. I feel like we're sort of dealing with a slinky kind of situation here where you start to move the front end of it with seeing that a closure needs to be made, but then because of a delay in a newspaper publishing, delay in landings that are actually coming in, it takes a while for that whole slinky to catch up with the front end, and there's a lot of room inside of that whole length of the process for overages to occur. So I would hope that we would take a look back at this to see how it's actually playing out on the ground or on the dock, if you will, as soon as we possibly can. And to my colleague from the House in Maine, I'd like to offer any assistance possible. The Massachusetts House, in a number of areas, has changed over the last session or two our public notice requirements for everything from town meeting notices to public hearing notices to reflect the fact that everybody can walk around with one of these and receive things online, also to address the additional cost. I think there's a number of ways to look at this. For some members of the House and Senate, if you say it's going to save the state X hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's a compelling argument. If for other members of the House and Senate, you say it'll provide greater notification, and for those who care about protecting a resource like this, that it'll provide notification in a more timely way so that we can be more nimble, let people fish when they're allowed to fish, but then shut down the fishery. I think there's a lot of compelling arguments to your Attorney General, to your governor, whoever that may be, in a week and a half. I'd be happy to work with you and look at what our model legislation is. Thank you.
Bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could address Maine. Does it say in the law that you can't close it until you published it in the newspaper, or can you publish it in the newspaper, but also, since there's not that many, that you could also alert them by other means that this is what's going to happen, and put it in the newspaper if the law says you have to, or does the law say you can't close it until the newspaper publishes it?
We are bound by the newspaper limit. I mean, very, very clearly, we have to publish our notice in order for the notice to be legal. It's got to be published in the newspaper. We do multiple other outreach. I mean, I'm sure you're on Matt Ciari's email distribution list. That's a courtesy notification process, but it has no legal binding authority. Are there any further questions, comments, or thoughts about what I hope was just a one-time anomaly? To Representative Peake's point, we have had this process working for a number of years without a problem until this time. We've had a slight change in NIPS staff. I think by working with them, we're going to be able to plug the holes and ensure that this doesn't happen again. So. Seeing no further comments, those who support the motion on the board, please indicate so. Joe, you want me to read it? Okay. Sorry, Joe. It's moved to recommend to the ISMP Policy Board to send a letter to NOAA Fisheries recommending a modification in herring closure notices to reflect ASMFC no landing days and timing of state notifications directors. Motion by Mr. Grout and seconded by Mr. Adler. Okay. Those who support the motion on the board, please indicate so. It's unanimous, carries 7-0. The last agenda item I have under other business concerns ACCSP funding, which will be before the Coordinating Council tomorrow. The state of Maine has had a commercial catch sampling and comparative bycatch sampling for herring, mackerel, and menhaden funded through ACCSP under the maintenance component for the last 13 years. This program enables the current age structure model. It supports the spawn enclosure management. It directly involves haddock and river herring bycatch and incidental catch monitoring. It runs from Maine to New Jersey. It's a roughly $200,000 project that has been pared down to about a $150,000 project, but it's been the cornerstone of our monitoring program. It's fallen below the bar at ACCSP. And so I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. We're going to try tomorrow to bring it back above the bar. There's some creative thinking going on, but in the past we've also sent some correspondence from this section to the either at one time to the coordinating council and other times to the policy board. But I don't know what. Well, I think Doug might rise to the bait here.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman of the council's hearing committee, this project provides so much information to this herring management process here that if we lost this, we'd be dead in the water. As Terry mentioned, we wouldn't be able to get spawning samples. It provides information for the whole stock assessment, the catch at age stock assessment, the age samples. It's involved with the river herring bycatch monitoring as well as the haddock monitoring, bycatch monitoring. So I'd like to make the following motion that the Atlantic herring section recommend the commission request the ACCSP Coordinating Council fund portside commercial catch sampling for the Atlantic herring, Atlantic mackerel, and Atlantic menhaden fisheries.
Okay, motion made by Doug Grout, seconded by David Pierce. David.
Yeah,
David Pierce and David Borden.
Oh, sorry. This makes a great deal of sense, obviously, from the sea herring perspective side. If it wasn't for the money provided by the commission to do this port sampling, the states, as well as the federal government, would be in a very difficult position relative to our understanding what's actually being caught and landed in a very important fishery, a fishery that, of course, is in the public's eye. I can say that because of the emails I've received over the years regarding the sea herring fishery and the interactions the fishery has with other users of herring or other fisheries where herring, of course, is important as forage. So we need to continue to have a good understanding of the nature of the bycatch landings of river herring, the shad, the haddock, and whatever else. And the sampling that's been done to date by my agency, by the state of Maine, has been quite comprehensive. And it's resulted in our having information that's really put me and others in a position of saying whether bycatch is occurring and to what extent. Unfortunately, bycatch has been low, and in some cases not happening at all. It's given me a great level of comfort in terms of how I interact with those who have great concern about this fishery. We all do. And so data are required. This is the way to get that continued stream of data. So I fully support this, as well as, of course, the add-on that is a mackerel, as well as the menhaden fisheries, too.
David Borden.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this motion gets implemented, my assumption is it'll bump another project Is that correct? And if so, what project will get bumped?
Well, I'm not going to speak for the whole coordinating council, but on one of the other things I was doing on Friday was working with Doug's staff, Sheree Patterson. We're looking, the state of Maine and the Commonwealth are looking at merging their swipe card programs. If that moves forward as we intend it to do, it will free up significant funds that should fund this, as well as a project from the state of New York that fell below the bar. It's not a done deal yet, though. Further comments from the section. Tom.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little background for me. You said the cost would be approximately $150K, and that's been pared down. Have the states, do they provide in-kind funding? Like, have you assumed some of the costs from previous years?
We're down to bare bones. We've let staff go. We've got one man doing the sampling of what was being done by 3.
Okay, so throughout the years, has sampling decreased?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to the motion for the question that Dave Warden raised, that we really don't know what the rejiggering would have to be done by the coordinating council. This discussion would probably be better served happening there at that time, so we could understand the full implications to it. You know, every species board or section can send forward a recommendation on their preferred project, and we've had that happen before as well, but I think it's premature to get involved in this now, so I'm going to oppose it. Thank you.
Any final comments from the section? Yes, Jim.
I'm just going to agree with Mark. Conceptually don't have a problem with this, but then what are we not funding? And we all have projects on there, and, this is important, but we got a lot of other ones that are important too, including, MRIP, things like that we got to. So, again, I'm not opposed to it conceptually, but I'll probably vote no to it just because of that. I don't know what we're losing. Thank you.
Any final comments, Doug?
Just a brief response. Again, this is the sentiment of this board. It's not going to be the final decision. It's just saying that the herring section feels that this is an important project. Final decision is made by the coordinating council, and they're going to be evaluating what projects are up and down. So I hope you'll at least consider this because of the importance of this to not only herring, but some of the other important port sampling, such as Atlantic menhaden here.
Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we don't ask, we're not going to get it. As Doug said, the coordinating council has a decision to make, but if we don't ask for the funding, for sure we're not going to get it.
Any final thoughts? Okay, move that the Atlantic Herring Section recommended commission requests the ACCSP Coordinating Council fund portside commercial catch sampling for the Atlantic herring, Atlantic mackerel, and Atlantic menhaden fisheries. Motion made by Doug Grout and seconded by David Pierce. Caucus, please. Everybody ready? Those support the motion on the board, please indicate so. And those opposed? The motion carries 5-2. Is there any final business to come before the hearing section? Seeing none, thank you for a productive discussion. This section stands adjourned.